Well, good morning. It's the Blues Brothers, apparently, with our little blue thing going on.
Morning, Blue Bruce.
Well, it is a blue day out there, Rod.
Blue,
It's rained
blue is the
all day
word.
yesterday. It's going to rain all day today. It's going to rain more tomorrow. They're expecting 2+ inches where we are, local flooding.
More tomorrow.
Oh, yeah. And then it's going to drop to 27 degrees. And then there's going to be rain on Saturday and Sunday, another 2, 3 inches. And then all of next week, it's going to get like 23 one day next week. It's like winter's back.
Well,
Turns out the little groundhog up in Minnesota was right.
I think tomorrow night's supposed to be 24.
Yeah, 27 where we are,
Okay.
24 where you, well, it may get down that just on top of the mountain where we are.
So
Yeah.
maybe we aren't putting the split units in tomorrow.
Well, probably not, Raj. I mean, it's on my calendar. I mean, we could do the inside part,
No, that's fine.
like where you're going to drill. I was thinking about it. I woke up with that on my mind this morning. We're going to drill the hole using little, have you got one of those drills that hold drills doorknob
Doorknobs,
holes?
yep.
Because that's the easiest way to go out because you got four tubes going out. But I woke up thinking about, all right, how are we going to install that? Where's that going? Because I have to do that at my house too. I've got a mini split for my house that I'm putting in. Second one, actually, it's the third one I put in because I put the first one in wrong and blew out the compressor. More on that later. Who cares?
I ran all the breakers. So I put in
Okay.
three breakers for the three minis, three new. So I've got it all wired. It's all ready to
You're
go.
ready to, and you got the power cord right there
Well, it's
or a plug, right?
right. Power cord is going. So I've got it. The line will go as long as it takes to get to the where we need to.
Look at Roger.
I've still got to find out from you, like how, anyway.
Yeah. So
I'm learning so much from Bruce these days.
yeah, I'm almost finished with the master bedroom. I've brought the flooring down, so I've got it painted. I've got the trim painted. I can't trim everything until I get the flooring down,
Yes.
just because I want the floor. I mean, the trim part of what holds the flooring in place
Yep.
is the whole trim thing. So, but we're not here to talk about that. You know what we're here to talk about?
The Super Bowl.
Which was meaningless. Well, you talk about a team being totally eclipsed by another team.
You know, there have been it's
I mean, it was the super blow. That's what I called it afterwards.
but the reality is an awful lot of Super Bowls have been blowouts.
I've endured some of those on the receiving end of said blowout, being a Denver Bronco fan in the 80s.
Now, whatever you think about the Patriots, their games were always close. They were fast.
Well, and we were all reminded because someone had to remind us, well, the Patriots came back from 24-0. You know, Tom Brady's just being as positive as he can in the booth. And I'm like, I don't see it. They had such a good defensive plan in place for getting to Mahomes because they knew the most dangerous person on that team is not Travis Kelce.
Yep.
It's Patrick Mahomes.
Yep.
Sacked him 5 times.
Six.
Six?
Six
I
times.
didn't watch that. I mean, at a certain point, I just turned it off. I mean, I was like, all right, this is not going to get any better. 6 times. That's nuts.
Right. Oh, yeah. He hasn't had any. I mean, yeah, it was the only time in his career he's been sacked six times with no blitzes,
Well, rushing four.
rushing four.
No, I mean, yeah, that's what I mean about such a great defensive scheme. They figured
Right.
new things to do with four people. So he doesn't have anyone to throw to downfield. Normally on a blitz, you're going to have someone to throw to. It's going to be someone open because there's an extra man coming.
Right.
Mm-mm. And they still got to it. And it was just,
And they
I just
contained
thought
him as well.
defensively it was brilliant. And obviously the other team scored what, 47 points, 44?
That's a lot.
No, it was a lot. So their offense had it going too. But yeah, what a not interesting game to me.
Right. But for a Patriots fan who is happy to see the Chiefs dynasty not climb to another level.
Well, everyone knows, yeah, everyone knows how to beat him now.
Anyway,
Rush forward.
they're doing phenomenal. I mean, the
Oh, yeah.
Chiefs are when it comes to a 6, 7 year span.
Don't even talk to my Bills fans friends
Oh.
about the Chiefs.
Oh my.
The only thing worse for Bills fans was the years they did get to the Super Bowl. You know, I mean, I just remember how horrible that.
4 straight years.
Oh, just brutal.
Yeah.
I mean, just brutal. Why?
But we're not here to talk about the Super Bowl, are we, Bruce?
No, I don't know. We are here to talk about one song well, actually two songs. So
This was recommended by a listener.
recommended by a listener is Pink Floyd's song Eclipse, which is a very short song, 2 minutes and 17 seconds. and it's a potentially depressing song. I mean, I'll be interested at your take. The whole song reminded me of it was sort of the summary. It was sort of a summary of the book of Ecclesiastes to me. When I looked at it, and then Roger's wife Joy added a song to the mix that we felt was on theme with Eclipse, which was Kansas, Dust in the Wind,
Yep.
which also, as I listened to it again this morning, mirrors Ecclesiastes. It
Very,
is
I agree.
fascinating. So, for people that don't know what Eclipse, the song Eclipse is, it's not a song, it's more of a ditty. The whole song sounds like the conclusion of a song.
Yeah, and it's short, right?
So it's short and it's just, all that you see and all that you do and everything in life and everything that happens and all that you love and all that you hate and all that you have and all that you give away and all that you keep and all that you store and all that you fight and all that you, in other words, everything under the sun, literally, if you quote
Under the
the
sun.
preacher, because that's what everything under the sun is in tune, but the last line is, and the sun is eclipsed, but the sun is eclipsed by the moon. And I'm like, okay, there's meaning in that.
What? So, what was your take on the meaning of that?
Well, I felt like Pink Floyd's take on it was a little bit of the meaninglessness of life. You can have all of these things under the sun, but in a moment, all of that can be gone. Now, here's what I did a little research on the word eclipse because that was fascinating to me. I'm like, because
Okay.
one of my other favorite songs was the Total Eclipse of the Heart. I always loved that
Yeah.
song.
Yep.
It's the idea of an obscure something that obscures something else. So a celestial body that obscures another. But here's what I thought about it. An eclipse, and perhaps properly understood, is not actually real. It's a shadow. In other words, the moon can't eclipse the sun in the sense of it can never block it. Even when an eclipse happens, there's light around the black. So you're in a shadow,
Right.
but in that sense, it's not real. I mean, the other thing I thought about an eclipse is, particularly because he's referring to how the moon eclipses the sun. It's only for a moment.
Yes.
It's only for a moment. So, man, so many thoughts came to me. The the first was the book of Ecclesiastes, which I'll come back to, but the second was the book written by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning,
Okay.
which is very similar to the book of Ecclesiastes. If you're not familiar with it, it's considered one of the top 10 most influential books in the United States, according to the U.S. Library of Congress survey.
Okay.
Introduced to the United States in 1959, written in 1946, Viktor Frankl was a Jewish survivor of the Holocaust and lived through German concentration camps. So he talks about his experiences in those concentration camps, but then he talks about the search for meaning, even in the midst of dire suffering,
Right.
great cruelty, all of that. And there's no time. Let me sum up. If you sum it up, he there's kind of three ways that he says that men find through creating or achieving, through encounters or experiences. Then that could be as simple as caring for another person or whatever else, and through dignity in the face of suffering or your approach to suffering. In other words, he argues that suffering is unavoidable. In other words, we look at someone that lived through a Nazi concentration camp. We're like, gosh, I mean, that's avoidable. Not everyone goes through that. Like, well, not everyone goes through what I went through, but suffering is avoidable. And what he found is longevity. The people that made it tend to live through the concentration camp experience. They had hope on the other side of it. In other words, their approach to suffering, their attitude about suffering was this was not the end,
Yeah.
which is a little bit how Ecclesiastes finishes.
Yep.
He finishes with this, remember it, chapter 12, which I read this morning, remember your creator in the days of your youth, before the days come where you say, I find no pleasure in them, which the older I get, the more I understand that phrase. And we've talked about this before when the old men stoop and it's like the creaky
Yeah.
joints and there's fear in the streets and desire is no longer stirred.
Hmm.
So he's like, meaningless, meaningless. This is Solomon and Ecclesiastes. Meaningless, meaningless. Everything is meaningless. So I've called the assembly. That's the other thing. The word Ecclesiastes literally means the assembly, and he was the preacher. He was the one that called the assembly. He said, "So the end of all this. Let me conclude my little speech here. Fear God and keep His commands, because there is because everyone in this life will be judged for what they do, whether good or evil. And you know what I realized this morning for the first time? Never saw this before. 61 years on the planet. Jesus quotes him. He quotes that exact line. Everything there's nothing hidden that won't be disclosed. But he talks at the end of this passage about uh, everything will be brought into light and shown for what it is, whether good or evil.
Okay.
There's this judgment, and I realize we don't. A lot of times we don't want to talk about judgment,
Mhm.
but Viktor Frankl actually argues that there's hope in judgment.
Yes,
There's great hope because there is judgment.
because judgment at some level is attached to justice.
Yeah, right.
That it is that life
That
is not random.
that there is actual good and evil.
Right.
There and what I love about, and this is where I ended up on it. I'm like, if there was no judgment, if there was no justice, life would feel meaningless. In other words, it would be enjoy what you can, because this is all that
Right.
there is. But my takeaway is no, we get both. We get to experience all of the good in this life that God's given us and enjoy this life. But we also know that in suffering, it's an eclipse. The sun temporarily, because it's always temporary, there's never been a like forever eclipse. It's temporary and it obscures something. And I realize it's in suffering that sometimes the goodness of God is obscured. And even when you think about the suffering of injustice, it's temporary because there is a judge who will one day bring
Mhm.
about righteous judgment, but it obscures the goodness of God in that moment. It reminded me of this, and then I give you time to talk. But I thought so much about this
Okay.
because I shared this with a client yesterday. You know, one of the things that when I went to the Lisa Turkhurst conference, this is just the one day, it's just one night meeting, but she said, the more that you trust the goodness of God, the less you will suffer. And I'm like, that is so true. In other words, even though suffering or the circumstances of the moment obscure, you can't see the goodness of God in that moment. We're trusting the goodness of God, and there will be a better story. The story doesn't end there. The story is going to finish better. Even Paul talking about working all things together for good. In my book, Desperate for Hope, is not a shameless plug, but it just reminded me I had a whole
Mm.
section, the last section of the book is called Finding Meaning. And I quote one of my counselors who said, the end of all grieving is to find meaning. And there's so much truth in that because in the middle of suffering, you can't find meaning. You're suffering, you're grieving, there's sorrow, there's loss, there's an eclipse.
Yeah.
It's like the Son of God, the goodness of God is obscured in this moment. But then later, afterwards, in hindsight, I realize how my life is richer, how my life is better, how I'm a better person because of the suffering that I experienced. And I realized, man, there's great. Often we find meaning in suffering post suffering. Does that make sense?
Well, it's fascinating when we're talking there. If I'm thinking about what you're, even that analogy, like behind the darkness of the eclipse is the sun. The light is
The reality of the sun hasn't changed.
right. It's still there. It's blocked momentarily, but the sun is the greater light. Actually the moon doesn't even have its own.
Yeah,
All the moon is dark. Whatever light the moon has, it actually comes
from the
from
sun.
the sun. It has no light on its own. The sun is the light. And so this even with that analogy is, yeah, though it's blocked, um, in that moment, you could believe the moon is all there is, the darkness is all there is. Um, and yet, oh no, it's just temporarily blocked, but it's not temporarily obscured, but it's not. In fact, it's still
Yes.
warming us. It's still actually giving light. It's still,
It's still doing that thing that the sun does.
right,
No, I was going back and I was looking at the at Ecclesiastes because okay, so I listened to Dust in the Wind by Kansas and I
right.
listened to Eclipse by Pink Floyd, which deal with the potential meaningless of of life. But even the writer of Ecclesiastes says, I find before the years approach when you will say, I find no pleasure in them. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars grow dark,
Mm,
an eclipse, And then he says this, and I'm like, man, this is what we're living right now. And the clouds return after rain. We had rain all day yesterday, and they're back today, and they're coming again this weekend. I mean, it's like,
Life is pain, Highness.
yes.
If anyone tells you something else.
They're trying to sell you something. And then he says this at the end. Remember him, your creator, before the silver cord is severed, the golden bowl is broken, the pitcher is shattered in the spring, the wheel is broken in the well. And then he says this, and the dust returns to the ground it came from. He's referring to man. Dust returns to the ground that it came from, and the spirit returns to God who gave it.
Right.
So there's hope, even in this dust that returns to the ground. I remember thinking in the culture we grew up, Tennessee Temple and all of that, and the independent fundamental Baptist culture, they would we would have preachers that would speak against Kansas and rock music and everything associated with it, and this dust in the wind, and I'm like, he's just quoting Ecclesiastes.
You know, what's fascinating, and it's one of the things, I love about this thing we're trying this year.
Yeah.
Because musicians just often speak so deeply and they
nail it sometimes.
And what if when we thought about Ecclesiastes as a song, there are actually quite a few songs that end up being, but I was thinking the song, the one thing that I would say, oh, that's my pause. The one thing I would say in that song, is the one word that's off.
In Eclipse or Dust in the Wind?
Dust in the Wind.
Yeah.
Is the word oh. So that song beautifully, we're absolutely dust in the wind. I mean, we are dust.
But it's not all we are.
Right. It's not all. So what's fascinating in Ecclesiastes is it's like the first 8, 9 chapters of Ecclesiastes are all we are.
Yeah.
All we are. Now he flips it, and there's a fascinating thing that comes out of this. But there's this beautiful, here is the world if all we are. And this is where he's right with the writer of Ecclesiastes,
yeah,
where he's really saying, if dust is all we are, make all the money you can, if dust is all we are.
Pursue pleasure, pursue amassing, creating,
people don't matter, gaining. You just do, you whatever. And it sets this up powerfully. I mean, it's this.
Well, I remember, this is for some of you listeners that don't know, I did this thing for young adults in 2005, 2008 called Renown. But I remember a series of messages that I did, talks that I did called Life's a Bitch and Then You Die.
Okay.
People were like, what is that about? And I'm like, I'm going to take people through the book of Ecclesiastes.
Yes.
It's this whole thing that life is hard and meaningless and all of that until you find that there is hope in justice. Fear God and keep his commands, because there is a day of judgment that's coming. And I realized, for me, just thinking through, even Viktor Frankl's book, and I enjoyed reading it, but it doesn't necessarily give the answer. In other words, he says, this is the way that I watched people approach finding meaning even in a concentration camp. Achieving, creating, building. In other words, if a person can even build something in a concentration camp, there's a certain meaning to that. Whether you're building a radio that you're trying to get messages out.
Yeah, beating the system. Even the challenge of, you're going to...
He talked about a profound moment that he experienced God through a Nazi guard who mercifully gave him a second cup of stew.
Yes, I remember that.
And how profound that was for him.
Yes.
But to see God in the midst of unbelievable cruelty and suffering and evil. But anyway, when I read the book, I didn't feel like he answered the question. And I realized this particular song, Eclipse by Pink Floyd and then Dust in the Wind by Kansas, they have provoked more thought for me than any other one that we've done, than any other song, where I've really gone, all right, like for me, where do I find meaning? And it is, and I think it's why Jesus says constantly, seek the kingdom, seek the kingdom, seek the kingdom. Because that is where meaning is found, in doing the will of God, which is the kingdom of God coming with. That is where we find meaning. I'm not, all that I am is not Dust in
Dust
the
in the
wind.
wind.
In fact, I'm an agent of God on earth. That seems important. That seems meaningful. That seems significant. And it's just, I'm like, wow. So many of the songwriters and poets, you're right, have dealt with the perceived
Right.
meaninglessness of life or the randomness of suffering. And there's a certain truth to that, except the one thing that I found exception with, I hadn't thought about the all part, was when I looked back at the
Yeah.
lyrics, they say nothing lasts, don't hang on, nothing lasts forever but
But
earth and sky. And I'm like, well, that's actually, Peter argues that that's the one thing that's going to go away.
Right.
It's like Peter in his books argues that the spiritual world will remain, but earth and sky are going to be devoured by fire.
Right.
And then God is going to recreate new heaven, new earth. Think about that. New heavens and new earth.
Right.
Earth and sky are going away. They ain't lasting forever.
And it's the thing of it's the one of the realities of the dust type. I mean, if that's all there is,
Yeah.
then right, in that sense, the only thing that really even lasts isn't us. It's the somehow the dust of others goes on, and it's just fascinating, though, how here's capturing powerfully this half truth, because like even fascinating that the Bible narrative is that God made us from the dust of the ground.
Yeah.
This is actually
Yeah.
and the Bible itself uses the phrase, we're going to return to dust. Ecclesiastes, I think there's another
place, yeah.
got another place where so this idea
ashes to ashes, dust to dust. We do funerals.
That is not untrue. In fact, it's actually powerfully, literally, God makes us from the dust of the ground, but God is the part of the story. So here's a fun story about Kansas. I don't know if I've told you, I may have, but so
I'll let you know if you're retelling a story.
4 or 5 years ago, there's a guy out in Decatur who has a whole bunch of model cars. I mean, like hundreds. And he's got a price for those. And I go out to talk to him, end up buying these from him to sell on eBay. So I'm talking to him, and we're loading stuff in boxes, whatever. Um, maybe I saw a guitar or something. He said, that asked him about playing whatever, and he was kind of talking. He said, "Yeah," he said, "years and years and years ago." He said, "I knew the guys from Kansas." He said, "I got invited to join the band when it was
Oh my gosh.
when it was starting."
You haven't told me this story, by the way.
So, and this leads to something fascinating,
Yeah.
very Ecclesiastes like. So he's talking, and he decided he had just gotten married.
Okay.
And he just decided that life on the road, that this was not going to, and it didn't sound like he was regretting,
It's not going to be particularly beneficial for a married life.
but he was just saying different interesting things about the guys and
Yeah.
and those kind of things. But there's some point where he said, the lead guy became a pastor. He said,
Okay.
yeah, so now here's what's and you can look this up, Kerry Livgren, who wrote Dust in the Wind. So he wrote the song.
Roger and his fun factoids. Here we go.
And he also wrote their second most famous song,
Carry On My Wayward Son.
Yeah, Carry On My Wayward Son. Thank you. So again, fascinating the backstory of that song, but he wrote the song. He wrote it wasn't a season of his life. Like he's looking at all these religions. He's trying to figure out life. This comes to him from even the phrasing of the song Dust in the Wind comes from maybe an Indian song that he had come across, but he was familiar with, I think, different texts.
Okay.
And whatever. So some point later, Kerry Livgren, the guy who wrote the song, trusts Jesus. He comes to this place where he has, and this is the thing, he ends up having this Ecclesiastes moment in his life. Like when he wrote the song, he was in the first half of Ecclesiastes.
Okay. Yep.
He didn't have answers. All he could see was
Creating,
this.
achieving, building, amassing,
Where there's
all for naught.
right, you're right. There's really nothing to it.
Uh-huh.
There's no meaning.
All the
Um,
money in the world cannot another minute buy in this life.
Powerfully true.
Huh?
This is what I love about that
Jesus
song.
also said that.
Like all of these things, it's like actually this is a part of the gospel. This is a part of what's true about the world is we are dust, which speaks to our frailty, which speaks to our dependentness. We were made, we're only sustained by dust speaks of our smallness.
Yeah.
All things that we need to remember, like we desperately need to remember that we're dust, but we also need to remember the God behind the dust, the God who takes dust and puts his image in the dust in a way where that dust will last longer than the earth and sky. We, the dust, sustained by God, literally, well, we're the ones who are going to last forever. What lasts forever is God and people.
Uh-huh. You're going where I was going to go with this.
Yeah.
Everything else is temporary. An eclipse is temporary. Matter is temporary. In other words, God can, in a way that I don't understand, he can eliminate matter. In other words, out of nothing, ex nihilo, he speaks matter and energy into existence. He can also remove those from existence. And then he's going to recreate new heaven and new earth. I mean, that's kind of thing that I just love thinking about. You talk about hope for the future, as hard as this life can be, or the difficulties in this, I mean, but also the beauty in this world, the beauty on this earth. And God's recreating. Oh my goodness.
No,
What's that going to be like?
I think of this almost very often when I watch any of these remodeling shows, any of these makeover,
Yeah.
I keep thinking about, oh, the big makeover.
Yeah.
And by the way, like I'm in the middle of making over this second house that we own, which we'd like to rent, I think.
Oh, God, a second home. It's on the wall road.
It's we bought this one for $17,000.
You are out of control, Roger Martin.
I know.
The house we live in actually was considered of no value 2 years ago. Like literally the appraisal said $0 of
Oh,
value.
stop trying to top my story.
And we live in it now.
But like
Sorry, that was sort of a topic.
I love remodeling, which flows from the heart. God loves remodeling. And
he loves creating and he loves remodeling.
So what you love about a remodel, I like remodeling more than a brand new build. Now, there's a brand new build is fun, but there's a particular fun to taking something.
Because you're recreating.
Right.
The original builder created.
But it has some original character or things that I want to keep, but then I want to, but isn't that what God, this is part of the, I mean, when I look on the other side, Jesus, the Father, that's the greatest joy. But because we were made for a garden, that we have messed up a lot. You think about a tenant who did not take care of a property well.
Yeah.
We are that tenant, but God, he's looking, I'm going to remodel this house. You think about all that's beautiful and gorgeous in this world. And God's going to remodel. He's going to take, I think, the bones, the things that are so beautiful, whatever, but you ain't seen nothing yet. I mean, watch what I'm going to do.
Well, and I realize as we're using the extreme makeover kind of analogy, it's also going on currently. In other words, I realize God is in this process of remodeling Bruce. Even when I began to first follow Jesus at 25, I had a certain personality and a certain bent and a certain uniqueness to me. He hasn't changed that. He's remodeled it. He has shaped and formed my character very differently. In other words, fundamentally, this person that he created 61 years ago was good. I mean, when I say everything God created was good, but then sin and the world and Bruce's rebellion and everything else and gravity in general begin to wear on said body and personhood.
Gravity in general.
Well, it's in my 60s, I'm realizing gravity has a greater effect on the body than we knew when we had very flexible, elastic skin. But he's in this remodeling process with me right now. And that also gives me hope. It's not like,
Oh,
oh, Bruce was
yes.
such a train wreck. We can't even work on the locomotive. We can't on the engine. There's no way to get this train back together.
Right.
He's like, no, well, first thing we're gonna do, one of David's famous lines is we're gonna after we get it back on his wheels, we'll be able to make a better assessment.
Yeah.
And then he gets us back on the track, and then he begins to move us slowly. I'm just realizing as I'm listening, I'm not dust in the wind because God finds me meaningful enough to keep investing in.
No.
He keeps working on me, never gives up on me, continues to grow me. That which also tells me there's stuff that he wants me to be a part of. He's still inviting me into things that he's doing in the world. He's still times asking me, what do I want to do? And I'm like, really? That seems like you should be dictating all of that.
No, and isn't that part of the glimpse and part of the hope and part of the assurance? Like if God can change, I look at things God has changed in me
Oh, yeah.
and look and say, that's not a small thing. Like I was pretty screwy here. I'm still pretty screwy in X number of places, but like I know on various fronts, I've watched, yeah, God is transforming. He is doing some things. Um, I still remember. Here's that this popped in my head. Still remember a former youth director, youth
Roger
pastor.
actually remembered something and
Let's stay
noticed
with
that he said it popped in his head.
So a youth pastor. So at our church, Grace Church, at some point, this was one of the youth pastors
Bill Miller,
who shall not be named.
Pat Hand,
But at some point later, I'm
John Traris.
maybe in college or whatever. He said, in a candid moment, he said, I never thought you'd amount to anything.
That is a candid moment.
Person kind of went to me like,
Wait, you were the firstborn, and I don't think I ever heard anyone say to me, I don't think you'd ever amount to anything.
so you think about someone, but you think about what a grace that God didn't believe that.
Yeah.
What a grace that, like literally, this is what keeps you humble is like someone was looking at my life and saying, I don't think so.
I'm not seeing
This is not going to go with. I'm seeing prison. I'm seeing.
Well, and I remember what a youth pastor said about me. It wasn't my youth pastor, interestingly enough, but it said about me to my wife to be, Marlena. They said, I'm not even sure Bruce is saved. Which is, I guess, similar to, I'm not sure he's ever going to amount to anything.
We both had that
Do you
moment.
really want to
That's
date
right.
this guy? Because I don't even think he's like a Christian.
Right.
Which, in truth, I was not a follower of Jesus. So, from that perspective, he was correct.
But what
Whether
God
saved or not was not up to him.
can do from dust and mud and things that nobody else, sees any. You think about some people look at all they can see is the dust. All they can see is, well, there's nothing here. There's nothing meaningful. There's nothing hopeful. There's nothing significant. And yet God knows we're more than dust
Yeah.
because of him. Our whole meaning and our whole purpose and life and value
Yeah.
is all caught up in him. And then if I'm circling back around to what you've been saying, but then dust is never the end. Like in our dust to dust, ashes.
The commitment to the earth.
Right.
The commitment
Well,
of the body, which I found out
there's
is
this
the thing.
narrative of the world that is just, will you end with the dust? And nope, nope, because there's something behind the dust. There's something, and so on the other side, there's all that God has planned, everything that's caught up in Him.
So it reminds me, I'm just thinking, this popped into my head. The verse that I chose on my 40th birthday, so this was 21 years ago, it's sort of an obscure verse that was in Acts. It was like a verse that I chose for the year, but it said this. when David had fulfilled God's purpose in his generation, he died and his body decayed. In other words, he was pushing up
Mm.
daisies. It was dust that went to dust. But in between dust to dust, he fulfilled God's purpose in his generation.
Oh,
I still love that verse.
no, that's great.
To some people, that would be like a little dark, because he dies and his body decayed. But the beautiful part is he fulfilled God's purpose in his generation. And what I love is David was a train wreck. I'm sorry, he just was. I mean,
Right.
Lord have
He is the
mercy.
poster child
Oh,
for screwy
I was
God
like, well, if
followers.
sexual sin is like the litmus test for whether a person's a man of God, then that David's out. If murder is God's litmus test for who, no,
Well, even essentially rape,
yep,
a contract killing that involved killing
multiple people,
multiple people.
collateral damage all over the place,
Right.
lying and killing his one of his best friends,
Right.
one of his 30. So
Right.
these are the people. I mean, betrayal, treason. I mean, just brutal.
Right. And he's a leader. He's the model. He's a model
Yeah,
for he's
forgot that.
right. I mean, um, yeah, so yeah, there is this reminder
Yeah.
that of what God, yeah,
Well, and I have a generation. In other words, however long God gives me to live, this is my generation. This is my time to fulfill God's purpose. And that is when I think of meaning and purpose are just to me almost the same thing. What is your purpose in life? It is why I'm sure there was such a the purpose-driven life became
hmm
the bestseller of all time other than the Bible because people want to know, does my life have purpose, and if so, what's the answer to that?
right,
And I'm like, I still at this even at my age, I'm like, I want to fulfill God's purpose in this generation, for me in this generation, and I want to enjoy all that God's given. In other words, as a part of me as I get older, that I start sometimes creeping into that. The days come where I find no pleasure in them, where the time comes where desire is no longer stirred. I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to stay there because some of that is I lose hope for the here and now.
yep,
Even in a very divided world right now, theologically, politically, and you name it. I mean, just there's sometimes it wearies the soul
sure,
a little bit,
sure, absolutely,
and you're like, gosh, I'm just kind of ready to go home, and just beam me up, Scotty.
yeah,
I think we're done here. But then I'm like, no, I can still. I mean, even the things that Kansas referenced, even the things that Viktor Frankl referenced in his book Man's Search for Meaning, even in the song Eclipse by Pink Floyd, and then in the book of Ecclesiastes, they're talking about creating and achieving. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is building, creating, achieving, and aligning that with the purpose of God,
right.
the kingdom of God. There was even like we've talked about this. We live on a farm now. There's this 54-acre farm, and I'm like, there's nothing, okay, in my mind, there's nothing like empirically kingdom building about having a farm and clearing land and building a house and all of those things. But I also realized, but part of what I'm experiencing is the beauty of Genesis 1 and 2. I want you to I want you to take charge of the earth. I
Kill
want
the
you to
dust,
build and create and
right,
plant and
right,
and I'm like, yes, I love that. And even I'm finding so much joy right now in this house that I'm remodeling because I'm seeing, Roger, it's so funny. I'm seeing a lot of signs from the first creator. Like when you tear out drywall and you see the studs, you'll see you put markings on the studs. Sometimes he wrote a line to remind himself this is 73 by 64.
yeah,
Or sometimes he wrote window goes
yeah,
here.
that's
And I'm
neat.
like, this is so cool. I'm
It
now
is, it is,
building on this other man's foundation, adding to it, developing it, and I'm writing my own stuff on the
yep,
studs because it is super helpful when you're my age. You go, wow, how long was that thing? Oh, there it is. It's 73 by 46, 73 by 46, whatever that is. But I told Marlena the other day, I'm like, I feel like when I think about legacy, I'm like, I feel like this is part of my legacy, what I would call my temporary legacy. This house represents, for me, a ton of blood, sweat, and tears, a lot of just work, and but it's becoming beautiful. It's this, and there's good in that.
yeah.
So even in that, I'm trying to stay aligned with the purposes of God, but part of there's nothing wrong with building, creating, achieving. It's just that that's not the end, because one day that house will be gone.
Well, this is, and I mean, maybe it's a great way to finish. It's the dust still matters. And if the dust represents the things that don't last, well, it still matters. God made the dust. God, God made the garden. He made the,
He
so
made
it's
matter.
always been a mix of,
You're saying matter matters.
right, the eternal and the temporal, the things that don't last forever are a part of the story. So enjoying those, but we enjoy them best when we remember our Creator. We enjoy them best when we understand they are a gift from God. We enjoy them best when
That's
they're a
yes.
way when we bless Him back. That He enjoys our enjoyment of the dust and the ground and the building and the growing and the inventing, and that He finds great joy in that. It's tying all of that together, the creator
We're
and the
doing that with
created.
God.
Any dichotomy that says earth bad, dust bad, temporal things bad, all that matters is eternal. No.
Well, that was even a central part of Gnostic teaching. Matter is evil,
Yes.
essentially evil. So
Right.
it doesn't matter what you
Oh,
do. It doesn't matter what you do
we
with
still have
matter.
vestiges of that. Certainly some
Yeah.
of the culture we grew up, yeah. The body, ultimately the body, you're gonna want to dance with that thing, and that's the worst thing you can do, or you're that body dangerous. Body is always a sin waiting to happen. Body is beautiful.
Yeah.
Dust is beautiful. Planting and these things, and it's keeping that in balance. It's the whole book of Ecclesiastes. We can take either one.
Yep.
Dust is all there is, or dust is bad. But the book of Ecclesiastes, actually, God has given us things richly to enjoy. He's given us, so when we enjoy them with Him, it's the perfect song.
It is. And I would say, in my finishing word to listeners is
Take us out, Bruce.
live this life well. I was reading this morning where Jesus talked about live awake, watchfully. Because one day I'm going to be returning, and he said basically live your life for greater reward than just here and now. And when we align our life to the purposes of God, the kingdom of God, there's not just the joy of living this life now, but there is the reward that follows, which I've always thought is just crazy. I thought it was good enough that he just saved me from
Yep.
hell and judgment. I mean, everything that I deserve. No, he's like, I'm going to reward you for the things you got right, Bruce. So enjoy those songs and find meaning and purpose in living out the way of Christ in your generation.
And be sure to send us in a song you'd like us to talk about
What Roger said.
because we like you.
We like you a lot. We like you so much.